Hello and welcome to the special edition of the Federal discussion where we'll discuss what has happened in last 4 days. Now, today, after 4 days of tense confrontation, India and Pakistan have finally agreed to a ceasefire. In a short and crisp message, the Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri told the media that at 15:35 hours, that is at 3:35 p.m. this afternoon, the DGMO of Pakistan called up his counterpart in India and proposed a ceasefire. Both the sides agreed, and it was decided that with effect from 17 hours, that is Indian time 5 p.m., all the action on land, air, and sea will cease, which means the ceasefire will be effective all around. Now, like all the three previous days, it has been a tense fourth day today as well. Early morning at 1:55 p.m., Pakistan had sent a high-speed Hafd 2 missile, which means supersonic missile with Mach 3 speeds, that is, three times the speed of sound. The war had clearly climbed up the escalation ladder this morning. And if anybody heard the briefing which happened this afternoon, there were lots of worrying developments. One, Pakistan had begun to amass troops on the borders. And second, both sides had begun to attack each other's military establishments and crucial infrastructure using high caliber guns and ammunition. The firing on the Rajouri and Punch sector in Kashmir and other areas, they have begun to use heavy ammunition. Uh, these are all were various escalation ladders. Uh, then while this was going on, later we learned that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in a tweet on X, he said that he and Vice President J.D. Vance were engaged with senior Indian and Pakistani officials, including Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Shehbaz Sharif. The External Affairs Minister Jaishankar and Chief of Pakistan's military, Asim Munir, and India's NSA, Ajit Doval, were also spoken to. So obviously, Rubio and Vance were in touch with each other. Now, the DGMOs of both sides will meet on Monday, May 12th, to hold further talks. And that's all been announced. It's a very crisp announcement. There is no mention of other outstanding issues, because this whole confrontation started after the attack on, Pahalgam on April 22nd. The other outstanding issues, whether these will we have to wait and see. But as far as DGMO discussions are concerned, it's more in the nature of technicalities because the Director General of Military Operation of the two sides are always on a hotline and they keep talking to each other so that there is no flare up on the borders. I think we would hear more in the coming days, but later, immediately after this announcement, just a few minutes before, there was another press briefing in which the three tri-services media officials. There was a Navy, there was Air Force, and by now familiar Army spokesperson. The three spokespersons came and announced that India behaved most responsibly and they dispelled all the rumors which they said were caused by the Pakistani army about destruction of Indian infrastructure and other things. And then they ended saying that Indian military continues to be ever on vigil to, protect land and, defend any kind of provocation that comes from across the border. Now, to discuss this, I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Dakshinamurthy, who's been following the external affairs for a very long time, and Puneet Yadav, who's been following the national politics. Let's discuss this. It's been quite a day of development. Dakshin, how do you see this whole development? The way dramatically the kind of war-like situation which happened 4 days ago after a strike on 7th of May, and today on the fourth day, equally dramatic, we see a certain ceasefire.
First of all, I think it's a big relief for a lot of people because the conflict seemed to be heading into a completely unprecedented direction, and there were signs that it would even turn into a full-fledged war. Um, but thankfully, as in the past, the US intervened successfully and managed to convince the leadership of both countries to restrain and, in fact, to disarm and go for talks. And then, after declaring a ceasefire. So it's also because, as we have seen, it is not in the interest of the big powers to see a conflict in the subcontinent especially between India and Pakistan, because it so happens that both the countries are allies of the US, and the US sees no merit in this conflict. Of course, the reason for the flare up in the first place was, partly an emotional response from India after the Pahalgam killings. So, in that sense, probably the US allowed some kind of a leeway to India to exhibit its anger against or outrage against what it says was a kind of a terror sponsored by Pakistan. But these are issues that will probably be settled at a later date. But as for the time being, the US has managed to do what it did earlier. When the Balakot surgical strike happened, and before that, you had a series of other similar instances when the Mumbai terror attacks happened. So there is a long history of US intervention, especially when it came to a conflict situation between India and Pakistan. And once again, Washington has proved that they have that kind of a hold over the leadership in both the countries, and it requires the friendship and the alliance of both. And it shows a level of relationship, say between Islamabad and Washington, and New Delhi and Washington. And then you also have a kind of a changed geopolitical situation, and especially this time around, you had Saudi Arabia getting into the act and then using its influence over Pakistan to do it.
Let's discuss some more things.
Yes.
Before you
Sure.
go on.
Sure.
See, this is for the fifth time. If you recall, the first time it was in 1986-87. That was Operation Brass Tacks, when Indian Army was conducting the exercise along the border, when it was almost felt that it would end up in a confrontation. At that time, the US intervened. Next was 1990, when again, the CIA chief, the American, he intervened, and then it was again stopped. Third time, 1999, Kargil War. Again, the US intervened. 2001, we all know Operation Parakram, which happened immediately after the Parliament attack. Again, the US intervened, and I think it was Bill Clinton that time as president.
That's right.
Then again, now 2025 Pahalgam. Now, two things I want to ask you before you go further. I would I would like to recall. See, Trump being Trump, what is the kind of role Donald Trump has played? Because the question is that it appeared initially that he was slightly either not involved or uninterested, or his attention hadn't turned towards that. But then today, he, in a purely a Trumpian way, he said, after a long night of talk mediated by the United States, I am pleased to announce that India and Pakistan have agreed to a full and immediate ceasefire. Congratulations to both the countries on using common sense and great intelligence. So he, being Trump, he immediately took the credit. And why it took 4 days? Why he didn't step in on day one? I mean, the way you explained that, was it an opportunity given for India to vent out its frustration, or it took some time for the negotiators to really convince the two sides and make them make them understand that, look, enough is enough. We should put an end to this war, possible war.
So, it's a combination of things. Number one, if you take Trump as a president, he's constantly been saying that he wants to be remembered as a peacenik rather than as a warmonger. So, to that extent, one can say that he did play his role, at least as far as this particular conflict between India and Pakistan was concerned. That is one thing. Secondly, if you recollect, it was just I think it was yesterday that JD Vance, the vice president, said it is none of our business and it's up to the India and Pakistan to deal with this. What it basically it was also an effort to do a kind of a smoke screen so that people really didn't speculate about what is happening in the back channel, because I think they did not want any kind of interference from any quarters into this very sensitive discussion. So even as Vance was saying it, at the back end there was a discussion going on at the background, and we have seen the result today that it has worked. That is one thing. And one more thing, the last 4 days, why it has taken 4 days is also because emotions were running very high in India following the Pahalgam attack. And really, the world, it's very difficult for any country to really defend or justify what happened in Pahalgam. It was a straightforward, clear-cut terrorist act, and nobody could, it's very difficult for somebody to have convinced India that, please don't do anything or lie low. So to that extent, I think also India is probably, as a state, it's also losing patience over this kind of repeated attacks on India, and which they attributed to Pakistan. And this time around, they just decided to go ahead and do what needs to be done in terms of a military option. So to that extent, the US, I think, gave a certain amount of leeway to India to go ahead and at least to some extent, carry out its plans. But at the same time, they did not want it to go out of hand. So it seems to be a very well managed control of the situation.
Yeah.
It was
So
probably,
one more situation here. I
yeah,
think what is important here to also discuss the role of Saudi Arabia.
yeah,
See, in the previous conflicts, it was US and only US which intervened. In this case, there seems certain negotiations are also on with Saudi Arabia, which is a kind of friendship which have developed in last last few years since
yeah.
this regime has come to power. We've come much closer, and also Pakistan has moved closer to Turkey. So there was this Middle East equation also, which probably also came into play. It being an Islamic country, is there anything you saw there?
Yeah, definitely, because Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have a historical relationship and they are extremely close. But in the last few years, Saudi Arabia has kind of, moved closer to the, though it was always a US ally, it has moved much more closer to the US in terms of the politics in the Middle East, or West Asia as we call it. So in the case of Saudi Arabia, for instance, they are even now today much more open to Israel, which was considered unthinkable a few years ago. So to that extent, there is a kind of a opening up that is happening in Saudi Arabia. You also may realize that Mohammed bin Salman, the prince of Saudi Arabia, who is actually the de facto ruler, he is bringing in a lot of reforms within Saudi Arabia. So there is a much more openness. And then very recently, you had Prime Minister Narendra Modi visiting Saudi Arabia, so where they really reinforced this kind of a relationship. So Saudi Arabia actually was in a very key position where it is very close to the US, at the same time also to Pakistan and to India. So it was a very strategically positioned to make a big difference as far as this particular conflict was concerned. And we have seen that now.
Yeah, okay. Puneet, now I would like to come to you quickly. See, this war was as much to tell the world that, look, India cannot be taken for granted. For last 70 years, we've been, last 30 years, three and a half decades, we've been seeing a whole lot of cross-border terrorism where Indians are getting hit. And so there was a certain messaging which was required, especially for the Indian government post, withdrawal of Article 370 in Kashmir, abrogation of Article 370 in Kashmir. So there was a certain peace which has returned to. There was certain normalcy which was being claimed, and this attack came at that situation. So it was important that domestic audience was equally important in this whole. As opposed to other battles, here is very much a situation where the government had to do a very careful, very well calibrated, messaging. Now, how do you see this has panned out? Because obviously, what has happened is this. Though it was an escalation, and every day they were climbing up the escalation ladder, the confrontation between the two sides. But also, I think a very clear message has been given this time to Pakistan by entering into some of those, deep inside Pakistan, which we haven't done in the past. Our military hasn't done in the past.
Well, Srini, to my best of my understanding, I think there's a very important thing that one needs to do to understand the politics of this, and to even begin doing that, it's crucial that at least academically, at least theoretically, we need to hyphenate what's happened in terms of the military exercise and what's going to happen or has happened or is currently being rolled out politically. Uh, Unfortunately or fortunately for the BJP, that is not how in practical politics it is going to pan out. Now, why I'm saying the hyphenation is important. The entire escalation, how did it start? It started with the Pahalgam attack. Now, when the Pahalgam attack happened, there were immediately questions raised to which, of course, no answers, no credible answers have been given till date from the government on how a security lapse of that kind was allowed to take place. It's only after that incident that what we saw on the 7th of May followed. Now, all those questions, which the difficult questions which the government would have had to answer with regard to, and this has been a consistent practice. We've seen that happen during Balakot, Pulwama, all of that. That you have these major security lapses, despite all the tall claims of being a very muscular state, and followed by then, of course, a post facto muscular response to Pakistan, which is immediately touted as being unprecedented. And then those questions on security lapses, on problems with the Kashmir policy, all become irrelevant politically. And that is exactly how this current situation, to my mind, will play out politically. Questions that needed to be asked, answers that needed to be given with regard to the Kashmir policy, with regard to what happened in Pahalgam, what led to what happened in Pahalgam, will become immaterial. If I can just take you back to earlier today and late last night, you had the BJP put out a tweet with a sort of an ad, or if you can call it that, already crediting the Prime Minister for taking Pakistan to hell, and that ad made this distinction that this is not the UPA government. Now, subsequently, all of today, there were, of course, objections raised by people from opposition parties, including, of course, the Congress. But if you were to play this out publicly, you will have, in all probability, 9 out of 10 people sympathizing with the government and not the opposition on this issue, because there will be questions on the UPA's track record, particularly UPA 1, 2611 and all of that, on their track record compared to the track record of the Modi government. And while if you actually look at in the number of fatality figures in the last 5 years, after post 2611, the last 5 years of the UPA, and the past 11 years of the Modi regime, what has happened is, yes, terrorism has been contained in the sense that you don't see terror strikes happening across the country as you would see during the UPA, the first 5 years of the UPA regime. But in actual sense of fatalities, if you look at the numbers in fatalities, particularly in Kashmir, uh, after Article 370 abrogation or even before that, those numbers have gone to the pre-UPA, the pre UPA days. They've been climbing up. For the last 5 years of the UPA regime had brought those fatality figures down because of their policies. One can engage on that on a different level. So politically, I think for the Prime Minister, what you will see panning out now are these great congratulatory messages for his muscular policy, for teaching Pakistan a lesson, and more relevant questions that needed to be asked to him with regard to domestic security and all of that will sort of take a backseat. So it is a big win for the Prime Minister in that sense.
Sure. We'll discuss that further. Before that, I just want to quickly, Dakshin, if you can quickly answer and be brief with this. How do you think it will pan out in Pakistan? Because, this issue, what he described right now, Puneet, in India, it holds equally valid there where Asim Munir is a kind of a, he's considered a kind of an Islamic general. How's he, what is that he is going to take back after this ceasefire?
It is, if you look at it strictly speaking, it is going to be a little bit of an issue for Pakistan to explain this to its own people, especially given the kind of militant tone that Asim Munir took, when describing his India-Pak relationship, and also on the Pahalgam attack. It is going to be a challenge, and but the only thing is that in the case of Pakistan, as you know, that the military is very powerful, and it can control the narrative the way it wants. So they will probably get away with that.
Okay. So quickly, Puneet, I'll turn back to you. Jairam Ramesh, there is a statement which he had said, in view of the unprecedented announcement in Washington, D.C., there are need for more than ever before. So he has asked those questions. The PM to chair an all-party meeting and take political parties into confidence. And then he's also asked for a special session. It related to Pahalgam terror attacks, the way forward to demonstrate a collective resolve. So do you see this opposition, which seemed, during these, 4 days, they're very, they were on the side of the government. There was not one voice which was kind of, which should have been otherwise problematic, because when the nation was on the brink of war, I think opposition behaved quite responsibly and they kept their tone down. Do you expect them to start asking questions once the dust settles down?
Well, it is a very tricky road to navigate for the opposition. One, I think, yes, they've behaved very responsibly with regard to what's happened over the last 4 days, and in fact, even after the 22nd of April when Pahalgam happened, they constantly emphasized on the message of unity, of bipartisanship, of telling the government that we are completely with you in whatever action you wish to take. Now, the opposition, one needs to understand, is also coming from a place where they have, and particularly the largest opposition party, the Congress, they've burnt their fingers in the past, when their leaders questioned the veracity of the Balakot, the strikes. And the 2019 Lok Sabha election results showed how the country sort of responded to those questions being raised by the opposition, and particularly the Congress party. So with that in mind, the opposition did not want to put out any kind of statement which the government could have construed or sold to the masses as being anti-India, anti-national, pro-Pakistan and all of that. But now, if the ceasefire that's been announced today holds, and we hope that it does, how does the opposition corner the government? How it formulates its questions to the government? Will it still be able to forcefully ask the government about its Kashmir policy? Will it be able to ask this government, which for the last 11 years, every time, some criticism has come for India in, whether because of the politicians from the opposition or because of independent agencies, etc., in with regard to anything to do with India. Uh, if there has been a statement made on foreign soil or a foreign entity has been involved, the standard line of the government has been in our domestic matters, in our matters, we will not stand any kind of foreign interference. The of course the it's difficult comparing the two situations, but how the United States has played a role in mediation here politically for Modi to then turn around and give a reply on what grounds? Because naturally, once, of course, right now there's ceasefire today, but over the next few days after the 12th of May, when the DGMOs speak again, there will be back channel talks. There will have to be some kind of a trade-off with Pakistan, with regard to
Okay.
normal.
So that
So,
question.
yeah. So I'm saying that the Prime Minister, can the opposition have the guts to ask the Prime Minister that what happened to your no foreign involvement, no foreign interference stand? So there are going to be very difficult questions, very difficult times for the opposition in framing the questions it wants to ask, even when if at all the Prime Minister concedes a special session of Parliament or even to attend an all-party meeting. We've seen him not attending any all-party meeting, after Pahalgam or when the attacks, when the counter, offensive was launched. He has skipped the all-party meetings. He hasn't conceded a Parliament session. Whether he does that, if he does that, what is his statement and stand going to be? Whether it's going to turn around to reminding the country about the UPS past, we'll have to wait and see. But it's not a very happy situation for the opposition to be in.
Right. So quickly, you see, this issue has Dakshin, there is an issue here. Today DGMO talks were announced, which will happen on 12th. But of course, no agenda was given. It was a very brief statement that they'll continue the talks on 12th. Now, how do we see this? Whether there will be a status quo before the attack, that is April 23? Do we see the situation? For instance, two things came into effect. India kept Indus Water Treaty in abeyance, and Pakistan kind of said that we won't go by Simla Agreement. Now, what happens to these two issues? Do we see a kind of a reversal, or it has to open? The DGMO talks will only end at the question of technicalities where withdrawals and other things happen, and the soldiers go back to the barracks. Whereas this has to be taken up by External Affairs Ministry.
Yes, this is a interesting question, because the Indus Water Treaty, in the first place, there was always a demand by India that it should be renegotiated, because now there is a kind of a feeling that in 60 years, things have changed, the ground situation has changed, the demography is also altered, and it was time for it to be reassessed. So India would go for this option, saying that we will not keep it in abeyance, but we still need to renegotiate it to make it more fair to India. This is a contention. So, because strictly speaking, international river water tribunals judgments can't be kept in abeyance. There is no such provision in that in the tribunal. But they will still go ahead and say that, fine, we will not block the water or do anything that affects the flow to Pakistan. At the same time, we should also keep the option of renegotiating it open. So, which could be, it's a kind of a via media, so which is okay for Pakistan as well, because this is an ongoing issue. Even it predates even the Pahalgam attack and all that. That is as far as the Indus Water Treaty is concerned. As far as the Shimla Agreement is concerned, it was more a rhetorical statement by Pakistan, because Shimla has, played a, Shimla Agreement post Shimla. It happened after the defeat of Pakistan in the 1971 war. And if you look at the Shimla Agreement, it again basically makes the point that Kashmir cannot be again used as a starting point for another war between the two countries. So in that sense, it's a little fuzzy, as when they say that we're going to keep it aside, or we're not going to respect the Shimla Agreement. It's a little fuzzy in the sense it's not exactly clear what exactly Pakistan meant, because there are a whole lot of other issues as far as the Shimla Agreement is concerned, and I don't think that materially will change much as far as the ground situation is concerned.
Yeah. So quickly, I will now turn to one question which we, being in the media, must be asked. I'm sure everyone has a certain view on that. Here, so when it's a kind of a wartime kind of a situation, the government will obviously look at the media, and especially we are living in an age of social media where the information flow is very fast and misinformation is much faster. That's what we have seen. So, to looking back these 4 days, I'm restricting this question to the kind of coverage we saw on so-called mainline media, both television and print. Puneet, what do you see here?
Well, I think that there is a lot of introspection that the media needs to do. I think we and particularly the Indian media, I because we had very limited access, remember, to the Pakistani media over the last 4 days, because most of those were blocked in India. Including their Twitter handles. We saw even Twitter put out a statement saying that the Indian government had asked for 8,000 Twitter handles to be blocked. Even before that happened, several of the Pakistani, news channels and all those were blocked. So one can't comment on how exactly they were reporting on the situation. But from how you've seen people, journalists from across the globe, people at large commenting on the circus that we ran on Indian television channels and on social media. So and I don't think even the government, which has, of course, over the last 11 years nurtured this kind of a media, would have been very happy to see the sort of monster it's turned into because of the way reportage was done. I mean, we just had a ceasefire announcement today. But if we go by the Indian mainstream media, we had already captured Pakistan day before yesterday. Yeah. So there is a lot of introspection for the mainstream media here. I think in editors downwards for mainstream platforms, one can't really do much of regulation on social media, but at least in mainstream media, proper media platforms need a crash course on how responsible reportage needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, it's important that you also kind of contextualize the current regime. Now, here, you see, I think we've already discussed most of the issues. I would like to wrap it up, but then there are a few things I think which are still need to be, the answers have to be found out in the coming days. Now, what happens to the 9 spots, which were 9 sites in Pakistan, which were attacked by Indian government, Indian forces? It was for the first time. We've been hearing it for a number of, for decades. We've been hearing that about training camps, about how, terrorists are prepared there, the schools of terror where terrorists are made and sent into, to Indian soil. We heard about all that, but we saw live on screen the actual attack taking place, and then a virtual dossier being prepared, which particular place, which terror camp was held, who was trained, and how it was connected to a certain attack in India. The entire life cycle of the training and its, ultimate attack happening was described through these, and it was also given to the, kind of the whole country saw that. I'm sure the world saw it. What happens after that? Will there be some kind of a halt on terror? Will the camps disappear? How do we secure the borders once again? What happens after this confrontation? What are the lessons the military has learned? What are the lessons the political establishment learned? What are the lessons our people have learned? I'm saying I'm just thinking loud. I think these are the questions still left unanswered.
Yeah.
With that, I close this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.